Manipulation to them is not a tactic. It is a psychological reward system. Niccolò Machiavelli warned about this centuries ago. Power is sweetest when the victim believes they chose it. But here is the difference. This video is not about becoming like them. It is about seeing them. Because once you understand how their mind works, their power collapses, how manipulators think, what they look for, why they target certain people and avoid others, and how to become the one person they cannot control. This is some people don't manipulate because they have to. They manipulate because they enjoy it. Not for money, not for survival, but for the feeling. The subtle rush of bending another human mind. The quiet satisfaction of watching someone doubt themselves. The pleasure of pulling strings while pretending their hands are clean. These are not loud villains. They don't threaten. They don't shout. They smile. They listen. They agree. And while you're busy explaining yourself, they're studying you. They don't manipulate only when circumstances force them to. They manipulate when the opportunity presents itself. Sometimes even when there is nothing tangible to gain. Because the reward is internal. Control activates the same neurological pathways as dominance, gambling, and power. Each successful manipulation releases a quiet surge of dopamine. Not excitement, not joy, satisfaction. You hesitate. You adjust your words. You soften your position. You doubt your memory, your tone, your judgment. About protecting your clarity, your confidence, your autonomy. If you've ever walked away from someone feeling drained, confused, or subtly smaller than before, this video is your advantage. By the end, you won't fear manipulators. You won't fight them. You won't explain yourself to them. You will simply stand above the game they play. For most people, control is a tool, something used when necessary, something applied reluctantly, often with guilt. For manipulators, control is not a tool. It is pleasure. The process itself is the reward. Your confusion confirms their influence. Your frustration feeds their sense of control. Your emotional engagement reassures them that they matter. This is also why manipulators rarely appear aggressive at first. They don't dominate openly. They don't threaten. They don't force. They guide. They ask reasonable questions. They introduce doubt gently. They frame their influence as concern, curiosity, or logic. And while you are busy trying to be fair, calm, and open-minded, they are monitoring every micro-reaction. Your pauses, your tone shifts, your need to clarify. To them, this is not conversation. It is measurement. Every reaction tells them how much pressure you can tolerate. Every apology tells them how far you'll bend. Every emotional explanation tells them you're invested. And investment is access. Niccolò Machiavelli warned that power does not begin with force. It begins with understanding human nature better than the person understands themselves. Something inside them clicks. They feel alive. This is the part most people fail to understand. They assume manipulation is about winning arguments, securing advantages, or getting outcomes. It isn't. Manipulators don't care about being right. They care about movement. If you change even slightly, they've already won. That's why arguing with manipulators never works. You think the debate is about facts. They think it's about reactions. You bring logic. They observe emotion. You try to resolve. They prolong because first manipulation is small, a suggestion, a mild doubt, a harmless push. They are not testing your strength. They are testing your resistance. If you hold your ground, they retreat or adapt. If you adjust unnecessarily, they advance. And here's the dangerous part. Once manipulation becomes pleasurable, it becomes habitual. They don't stop when the situation ends. They don't stop when the outcome is achieved. They continue because the feeling reinforces itself. Control without resistance. This is exactly what manipulators exploit. They don't overpower you. They outweigh you. They allow you to talk until you reveal what you value. They listen until you expose what you fear losing. Then they adjust their influence accordingly. If you value harmony, they use guilt. If you value logic, they use reason. If you value kindness, they use vulnerability. Not because they care about those values, but because values create leverage. This is also why manipulators often escalate subtly over time. You're withdrawing their reward. And that feels like loss. Understand this clearly. Manipulators are not powerful because they dominate. They are powerful because people react. Remove the reaction and the power collapses. This video will not create manipulators. It will create people who cannot be manipulated. Because once you see that manipulation is about pleasure, not necessity, you stop personalizing it. You stop debating it. You stop feeding it. And in the next part, we'll expose something even more uncomfortable. Why manipulators deliberately seek out good, empathetic people, and why kindness without structure becomes their favorite entry point. Manipulators do not hunt the strong in the obvious sense. They do not waste energy on people who are rigid, dismissive, or emotionally closed. They hunt something far more specific. Good empathetic people offer access without realizing it, not because they are weak but because they are open. They listen. They try to understand. They assume good intentions. They create appetite. That's why manipulators grow bolder with people who tolerate them. That's why boundaries must be enforced early, not explained later. That's why kindness without firmness invites escalation to a manipulator. Unchecked access feels like permission, and permission breeds entitlement. This is why they react so strongly when their influence suddenly stops working. Why they become irritated when you stay calm. Why they provoke when you disengage. You're not challenging them. Believe clarity resolves conflict. And that belief is exactly what makes them vulnerable. Empathy is predictable. Guilt is exploitable. Good intentions are leverage. A manipulator does not see kindness as virtue. They see it as reliability. They know empathetic people don't like conflict, feel responsible for emotional harmony, explain themselves to avoid being misunderstood, internalize blame before assigning it outward. This makes their behavior easy to model. Manipulators don't guess, because they agree, but because alignment lowers resistance. Once resistance drops, influence becomes effortless. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Manipulators respect strength, but they feed on softness. Softness does not mean weakness. It means responsiveness, and responsiveness creates opportunity. This is why manipulators often frame themselves as victims early on. They share just enough vulnerability to trigger your empathy. They hint at being misunderstood, mistreated, or underestimated. And empathetic people do what they always do. They compensate. They listen more. They reassure more. They give the benefit of the doubt. What feels like kindness to you feels like permission to them. Niccolò Machiavelli warned that people are easily deceived by appearances, especially when they wish to believe something is good. Manipulators understand this instinct perfectly. They don't force trust. They invite it. They allow you to volunteer it. And once you do, the dynamic shifts. Your empathy becomes a handle. Your morality becomes a constraint on you, not them. Your desire to be fair becomes their shield. They can push subtly because you'll justify it. They can cross small boundaries because you'll rationalize it. They can deny responsibility because you'll search for understanding instead of clarity. This is why manipulators often frame conflict as miscommunication. It keeps you engaged. It keeps you explaining. It keeps the door open. And while you're trying to resolve, they recalculate. They watch how quickly you apologize even when you've done nothing wrong. They notice if discomfort pushes you to soften your boundaries. They observe whether silence makes you nervous. Every reaction answers a question they never ask out loud. How much pressure can this person tolerate before they adjust? That's why manipulators rarely start with cruelty. They start with connection. They mirror your values. They validate your perspective. They appear unusually understanding, not extracting value, time, attention, emotional energy, not because they need it, but because it reinforces their sense of control. Another hard truth: manipulators don't attach to people who say little and mean it. They don't stay near those who are calm under pressure. They avoid people who don't react immediately because those people offer no data. No data means no leverage. Empathetic people, on the other hand, often provide data freely: their fears, their values, their emotional triggers, not intentionally but openly. That openness is human. It's honorable. But without structure, it becomes exposure. This is why manipulators often lose interest the moment empathy is paired with firmness. The moment you say I understand but no I hear you but this doesn't change my decision, I don't need to explain this further, something breaks, not the relationship, the access, and without access manipulators disengage. They don't argue longer, they don't escalate immediately, they withdraw because empathy that cannot be exploited. Why manipulators develop a quiet, dangerous God complex. When manipulation becomes pleasure, something else begins to form beneath the surface. Not confidence, not arrogance, detachment. At first, manipulators still see people as individuals. They still respond emotionally. They still feel moments of guilt or hesitation. But over time, as manipulation succeeds again and again, something changes. People stop feeling real to them. Enjoying control repeatedly creates a subtle God complex. Not loud, not as useless to them. Understand this clearly: you are not targeted because you are naive. You are targeted because you are emotionally available. And emotional availability without boundaries is currency. This video will not make you colder. It will make you structured. You don't need to abandon empathy. You need to anchor it. Because when kindness is backed by clarity, manipulators have nowhere to stand. And in the next part, we'll expose what happens once manipulation becomes habitual. How pleasure turns into detachment and patterns, empathy disappears, not through cruelty but through abstraction. You are no longer someone being influenced. You are a response being generated. This is why manipulators often sound calm, even reasonable, while doing harm. They are no longer emotionally involved. They don't see themselves as taking anything from you. They see themselves as guiding outcomes, and in their mind guidance is not violence. This is also why they feel little to no remorse. When confronted, they rarely apologize sincerely. Dramatic, not obvious, something colder. They begin to see others less as humans and more as systems, inputs and outputs, triggers and reactions. Cause and effect. Emotion to them becomes mechanical. When you react exactly as expected, they don't feel proud. They don't feel excitement. They feel confirmed. Confirmed that their model of you was accurate. Confirmed that people are predictable. Confirmed that they sit above the process. This is where manipulators become dangerous. Because once people are reduced to, instead they rationalize. You misunderstood. You overreacted. I didn't force you. And technically they're right. You weren't forced. You adjusted. You complied. You chose. That technical truth becomes their moral shield. Niccolò Machiavelli warned that the most effective power never needs to announce itself because those under it believe they are acting freely. Manipulators internalize this idea deeply. They don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as cleared in their mind. Others suffer. Just how the world works. Notice the pattern. Responsibility is always externalized. Awareness is always expected from others, never themselves. And because they feel detached, they feel superior. Not in a loud way, in a quiet internal way. They believe they see the board while others see only pieces. This is also why manipulators become bored easily. Once someone becomes fully predictable, the stimulation fades. The dopamine stops hitting. So they escalate. They push boundaries further. They introduce chaos. They test. Not because they were manipulated but because they were unaware. This belief is what completes the God complex. They are not cruel in their own eyes. They are enlightened. This is why manipulators often show contempt for emotional reactions. They view emotional responses as weakness, sensitivity as inefficiency, boundaries as obstacles rather than signals. If someone gets hurt, the manipulator doesn't feel responsible. They feel justified. You should have known better. You shouldn't be so sensitive. That's reactions again. Not because they need more control, but because they need to feel control. This is where long-term manipulation turns corrosive. What began as influence turns into entitlement. What began as strategy turns into identity. They don't just manipulate. They see themselves as someone who should. And anyone who resists disrupts that self-image. That's why resistance triggers irritation. Why calm refusal feels insulting. Why emotional neutrality feels threatening. You are not disobeying them. You are contradicting their worldview, and that cannot be tolerated. Here's the critical realization. Manipulators with a God complex are not strong. They are dependent. Dependent on predictability, dependent on reaction, dependent on the belief that others are beneath their awareness. The moment you stop reacting as expected, the illusion fractures. The moment you stay calm, where guilt is expected, they feel destabilized. The moment you refuse without justification, they feel exposed, not angry, unbalanced. Because God complex is still engaged. When you explain your intentions, you are still offering access. But the moment you become clear, emotionally neutral, concise, and unmoved, something breaks. Because manipulation depends on reaction. Manipulators rely on emotional friction. They need you to feel uncertain. They need you to second guesses. They need movement. Clarity creates stillness. And stillness gives them nothing to work with. This is why manipulators escalate when their tactics stop landing. If guilt no longer works, they provoke. If reason no longer works, they confuse. If confusion no longer works, they attack your character. Not because they are angry, but because they are losing access. You'll notice this pattern clearly once you see it. When you stop explaining yourself, they accuse you of being cold. When you stop reacting emotionally, they accuse you of being heartless. When you stop engaging, they accuse you of being unfair or arrogant. These accusations are not observations. They are hooks designed to collapse when control is no longer invisible. That is why clarity terrifies them. Not exposure, not confrontation, clarity. A manipulator does not fear confrontation. They do not fear anger. They do not even fear accusations. They fear clarity. Anger is emotional. Arguments are engaging. Accusations keep the conversation alive. Clarity ends it. Clarity removes confusion. And confusion is the environment manipulators need to survive. When you argue with a manipulator, you are still playing the game. When you defend yourself, you are. Also changes how you react. Manipulators expect immediacy. They rely on quick responses to maintain momentum. So you slow down, you pause, you think, you respond later. Not to play games, but to break rhythm. When rhythm breaks, control weakens. A delayed response introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty disrupts prediction. And without prediction, manipulation collapses. Another key shift: you stop correcting misunderstandings. This is difficult for empathetic people. You want to be seen accurately. You want manipulators escalate when emotions appear. They disengage when emotions disappear. This is why calm consistency feels threatening to them. They can't tell if you're angry. They can't tell if you care. They can't tell what move comes next. And that uncertainty is unbearable. Here's a critical point most people miss. Unreadability is not deception. It is selective visibility. You are not lying. You are simply not offering unrestricted access. Just as you wouldn't give a stranger to clarify intent. You want fairness. Manipulators use this instinct against you. They misinterpret you on purpose to pull explanations out of you. So you let misunderstandings sit, not because they are true, but because correcting them is optional. Clarity is for yourself, not for them. Unreadability also means emotional neutrality, not suppression, not numbness. Neutrality. You don't reward provocation with emotion. You don't reward guilt with reassurance. You don't reward drama with engagement. Your finances, you don't give manipulators your inner world. Another shift happens internally. You stop trying to win interactions. Winning requires engagement. Engagement feeds the game. Instead, you focus on outcomes. Does this interaction move my life forward? Does this person respect boundaries without pressure? Does continuing this conversation benefit me? If not, you disengage. Not dramatically, quietly. And this is where manipulators lose interest, because unreadable people are boring to them. No reactions, not predictable patterns, no emotional payoff. Manipulators are addicted to feedback loops. Unreadability starves the loop over time. They stop probing. They stop testing. They stop engaging. Not because they respect you, but because there is nothing to extract. And this is where power quietly shifts. You are no longer managing them. You are no longer defending yourself. You are no longer playing. You are operating outside their framework. This is not the end of the strategy. It is the foundation. Because once unreadability is established, something deeper happens next. Manipulators begin to reveal themselves without pressure. Their impatience surfaces. Their entitlement leaks. Their contradictions appear. When manipulation stops working emotionally, it doesn't stop entirely. It changes form. At this stage, manipulators stop targeting your feelings and start targeting your time, because time is the last uncontested resource. They don't argue anymore. They don't provoke directly. They don't pressure openly. Minute you spend explaining is a minute you are not building. This is why manipulators hate decisiveness. Not confidence. Decisiveness. Confidence can be debated. Decisions and access. You'll notice this pattern clearly. You make a decision. They don't oppose it directly. They delay it. Let's think about it a bit more. Now might not be the right time. We should revisit this later. Later never comes because delay is the outcome. Niccolò Machiavelli warned that power often works by exhausting opponents rather instead. They create drag, delays, urgency, false deadlines, endless discussions that never resolve. This is not inefficiency. It is control. When someone controls how long you think, how long you wait, how long you stay engaged, they control your momentum. Manipulators understand something most people miss. A person who is busy reacting cannot move forward. So they stretch conversations. They reopen closed decisions. They ask for just one more clarification. Not because they need it, because then confronting them. That's exactly what this is. Manipulators don't need to defeat you. They just need to slow you down long enough that you defeat yourself. This is especially effective on competent people. You are productive. You are thoughtful. You want to make good decisions. So you tolerate delay in the name of caution. Manipulators weaponize that. They turn your patience into friction. Here's the key realization. Time-based manipulation feels harmless because it doesn't feel hostile. No insults, no threats, no obvious pressure, just inconvenience. But inconvenience compounds. Momentum dies quietly. And once momentum is gone, confidence weakens. This is where resistance changes form. You don't argue. You compress. You shorten timelines. You reduce discussion windows. You remove open-ended availability. Instead of "let's talk about this sometime," you say "I've decided I'm moving forward." Instead of "we'll see how it goes," you say "this is happening on this timeline." Instead of "let me think about it," you say "I already have." This is not aggression. It is temporal authority. Manipulators panic when they lose control of time because time pressure works only one way. If you control the clock, they lose leverage. This is also why manipulators try to manufacture urgency, sudden crises, last-minute demands, artificial deadlines. Urgency forces reaction. Reaction restores control. So you do the opposite. You slow your responses while accelerating your decisions. Slow emotionally, fast structurally. You don't rush explanations. You rush execution. This creates asymmetry. They're still talking. You're already moving. And movement is something manipulators cannot stop once they are no longer inside your schedule. Another crucial shift. You stop offering unlimited access. Not emotionally, logistically. You don't always reply. You don't stay available. You don't keep conversations open by default. Not as punishment, as prioritization. Time access is power access. When becomes practical, not psychological, not emotional, operational. You don't need to outthink manipulators. You outpace them. You don't block them dramatically. You move forward without waiting. And that's when something final happens. They stop trying. Not out of respect, out of inefficiency. Because manipulators invest where returns are high. When influence requires effort, they exit. This is not the end of the process. It's the shift from defense to autonomy. And in the next part, we'll move again into how someone no longer controls when they reach you, they no longer control how they influence you. This is why manipulators often complain that you're busy once you gain ground. Not because you are unavailable, but because they no longer set the tempo. Here's the quiet truth. People who control their time are rarely manipulated. Because manipulation requires slack. Slack attention. Slack schedules, slack boundaries. When your life has structure, manipulation has no surface to grip. This is the phase where power presence, posture, and reputation change once your time is no longer available for manipulation. Once manipulation is no longer present in your life, something subtle but irreversible happens. Not externally at first, internally. You stop orienting yourself around other people's reactions. You are no longer scanning conversations for danger, no longer anticipating emotional fallout, no longer rehearsing explanations in advance, and without effort, your posture changes. Not physically, psychologically. This is where real power begins, because power is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not need validation. It stabilizes. Your decisions become faster, not because you rush, but because there is less internal debate. You are no longer negotiating with imaginary resistance in your head. You are no longer factoring in how something might be misinterpreted. You choose and you move. That decisiveness creates gravity. People feel it not consciously, instinctively. They stop pushing small boundaries. They stop testing you just to see. They stop slipping in comments that require correction because your behavior communicates something clearly. You are not available for psychological games. This is the moment when reputation forms. Not through branding, not through dominance, but through consistency. Your yes becomes rare and valuable. Your no becomes final. Your silence becomes intentional, and people adjust. Some step closer with respect. Some step away without drama. Both outcomes are correct. This is also when you're staged. You are no longer protecting yourself. You are simply operating from a position where manipulation is inefficient. Your time has structure. Your attention has cost. Your energy has direction. And direction is the ultimate defense. Manipulators do not attach to people who are moving forward decisively. They attach to those who are emotionally open but directionless. Once your life has momentum, manipulation becomes friction, and friction repels. Here's the final shift most people never. Relationships become cleaner. Less emotional debt, less confusion, less unspoken tension. You give when you choose, you withdraw when you decide. And you no longer explain either. That alone filters out manipulation. Because manipulators require ambiguity. They require emotional slack. They require space to reinterpret your intentions. When clarity replaces ambiguity, manipulation has nowhere to hide. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this long ago. Authority is strongest when it does not need to explain itself. At this rate, you stop caring about being understood by everyone. Not because you are indifferent, but because understanding is no longer required for action. You no longer explain decisions that are already made. You no longer justify boundaries that already exist. You no longer perform emotional labor to be perceived as good. You act in alignment with yourself. And that alignment creates something rare. Unshakable presence. Not intimidating, not aggressive, grounded. People feel it when you enter a room. They feel it in how you speak. They feel it in what you don't say. And manipulators feel it most of all because they recognize what they cannot move. This is not superiority built on ego. It is superiority built on independence. You are no longer a piece on someone else's board. You are no longer a variable to be adjusted. You are no longer available for extraction. You are operating from your own center. And from that position, nothing manipulative reaches you. Not guilt, not pressure. Not confusion, not urgency, only clarity. That is the real endgame. Not defeating manipulators, not exposing them, not fighting them, but becoming someone they cannot use. If this video gave you clarity, if it helped you see manipulation for what it is and showed you how to move beyond it, then like the video. It tells the algorithm this kind of thinking matters. And subscribe, because the next videos go deeper into power, psychology, and self-mastery without noise, without games, and without compromise. Stay sharp.